September 25, 2015. Moral Echo. Pope Francis addressed the United Nations General Assembly in New York as the first pontiff to deliver a speech during a regular session of the Assembly. He delivered a statement recognizing the 70-year history of the United Nations and urged global leaders to recommit to human dignity, social inclusion, environmental care, and peace. His address linked the moral and the political, rooting calls for reform in the tradition of Catholic social teaching. The speech occurred during his apostolic visit to Cuba and the United States, which included his first address to a joint session of the U.S. Congress and a Mass in Philadelphia. His address began with gratitude to the Secretary General and with acknowledgement of the delegates and representatives from across the world. He celebrated the achievements of the United Nations in promoting international law, human rights, and multilateral cooperation over 7 decades. He didn't portray the UN as a panacea, but called for institutional reform and greater equity, especially in bodies that wield executive or financial power. He urged that international governance must listen to the poor and excluded. He described economic exclusion as a denial of human fraternity. He warned that a blind pursuit of prosperity without moral insight leads to abuse of natural resources and worsening inequality. In a then uncommon framing, he called for recognition of the right of the environment, saying that environmental degradation carries moral weight and deep consequences for human well-being. He argued that if humanity fails to care for nature, it endangers the vulnerable among us. Pope Francis addressed conflict zones by name. He called for peace in Syria, Iraq, Libya, South Sudan, and Ukraine. He spoke against the arms race, nuclear proliferation, and the weaponization of poverty. He identified human trafficking, drug trade, the exploitation of children, and the marketing of human organs as morally unacceptable violations of human dignity. He emphasized education, especially for girls, and access to decent work, housing, and spiritual freedom. He impressed on delegates that the work of governments and institutions fails unless rooted in a vision of the common good. His intervention at the UN was historically significant because it brought the moral authority of the papacy into a global political forum at a moment when the world confronted climate change, income inequality, migration, and deadly conflicts. The timing came after the publication, earlier in 2015, of his encyclical Laudato Si', in which he framed climate change as a moral challenge and called for shared responsibility for the Earth. The speech at the UN extended that moral vision into the diplomatic sphere. In the address, he tried to bridge divisions between nations, creeds, and cultures by urging the construction of universal fraternity. He reminded leaders that no group or nation should act as though absolute or exempt from ethical constraints. He called on the powerful to serve, not dominate, and to ensure that their actions advance justice, not just profit or influence. The legacy of his 2015 UN speech lies in its symbolic and discursive impact. It reinforced the Vatican's engagement with global diplomatic discourse. It elevated moral language in debates over climate, migration, and inequality on the UN stage. It challenged members to think not only in terms of national interest, but also in terms of shared responsibility toward human vulnerability and ecological limits. The address stands as a moment when a global religious leader directly called on world institutions to rethink their structures, purposes, and priorities in light of human suffering and environmental crisis. For enthusiasts of historical ephemera, visit history-collectors.com to find collectibles that might complement your collection. You can own a piece of history.